Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Welcome to the Performance Matters podcast from GP Strategies, your talent transformation partner. In each episode, we'll interview industry experts and explore best practices and innovative insights to help your organization improve performance.
Today, as organizations continue to evolve rapidly, fostering resilience and well-being isn't just a nice to have. It's essential for sustaining performance, engagement, and overall well-being. Hi, I'm Michael Thiel, and in today's episode, we'll explore how to help employees and leaders navigate constant transformation while building the, and I'm using air quotes here, resilience muscles they need to thrive. To help us on this journey, I'm honored to be joined by two experts in the practice of organizational coaching and leadership, and also multi-time VIP friends of the Performance Matters podcast, Leah Clark and Sheryl Jackson. Now, for the uninitiated, here's a little background on these two amazing professionals to set the stage. Let me talk about Leah first. As the practice lead for the GP Strategies Leadership Consulting Group, Leah comes to today's conversation with decades of experience helping craft leadership and coaching solutions for organizations around the globe. Formally trained, she holds a master's in organizational psychology from Columbia University in New York City on the island of Manhattan and is a prolific author. In fact, I encourage you, dear listeners, to check out her many articles on the GP Strategies blog and also parse through the Performance Matters episode archive, where you will find her name appearing quite frequently. Welcome, Leah. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm like a bad penny, right? I just kind of keep showing up.
Well, we are glad you're here, and you are not alone. Okay, our second guest, Sheryl Jackson, who I affectionately call Dr. Sheryl Jackson, is the director of the organizational design and change management practice at GP Strategies. She holds a PhD in industrial organizational psychology from Kansas State in, get this, lovely Manhattan, Kansas. Like Leah, between balancing her role at GP and as a mom, somehow also finds time to serve as a guest lecturer for the Texas A&M Industrial Organizational Psychology Master's Program. And talking about resiliency here, Sheryl is also fighting through a summertime cold right now. So Sheryl, welcome back to Performance Matters. How are you holding up?
Oh, I'm good. Thanks for having me. Even though I'm a little bit under the weather, it always makes me feel so much better to spend some time with you.
Oh, please tell me more. This topic today, fostering resilience and well-being during workplace transformation. I mean, this is the time. You two have nailed this. I was so excited seeing this come up on the calendar here. There's so much to talk about. Hopefully you two are buckled up because we're going to kickstart this thing off. I'm going to start here with you, Leah, and that's the fact that we've been hearing a lot about resilience and well-being. So let's just level set that. What do we mean by that? And thinking about the workplace, how does it apply to it?
Yeah, what do these mean? Because they are million-dollar words these days,
Yes.
appearing just about everywhere. So so let's define them. When we talk about resilience, we talk about it as the capacity really to adapt, recover, and grow from adversity and change. Whereas well-being, we think about as the overall state of mental, emotional, and physical health. And as we talk about, I know we talk about these topics in the context of transformation. And the reason why is because during transformation, during change, both are super important for maintaining productivity, engagement, and preventing burnout. But I honestly think we need to flip it a little bit. And I was thinking about this a fair bit as we headed into this podcast, because we talk about resilience and well-being. But I think we need to consider, how do we not restore that sense of resilience or conjure up resilience when we need it during change or transformation, but how do we create a sustainable way of maintaining our well-being, focusing on well-being during steady times, so that it's then easier to demonstrate resilience when things get rough. So we say, oh, resilience and well-being, but for me, it's like, let's get the well-being addressed. And then when we need it during resilience, it's already a muscle that we've strengthened.
I like that. Now, you're hitting on a couple things here, and a little plug for Dr. Sheryl. She is our resident change management expert here. And a lot of what you were saying, Leah, is really change, transformation. So, from your clinical perspective, Dr. Sheryl, why is this so taxing on resilience and well being?
Yeah, so when we talk about workplace transformation, when we're talking about this process of rethinking our physical, digital, and even cultural environments, there's a lot of things going on, and any of these things could be a part of change, something that we're transitioning within our organization. And typically, when something like this happens in a workplace, we're updating skills, we're changing people's roles, we're redesigning structures and making significant adjustments, in many cases, significant adjustments to the way people are working. And it's all in preparation for our future. So, where are we going as an organization? Where are we going for teams? And this can be really tough on people. I mean, we're introducing uncertainty, disrupting routines, and changing the way people have been working for a long time, things that they're comfortable with. And prolonged change can create fatigue. That fatigue drains resilience, it puts a strain on their well being. And without intentional focused support, employees may really disengage or have this sense of burnout. And we start to see higher turnover, decreased engagement, absenteeism increases. And a significant one that we don't think about often, but it has a major impact on overall engagement, is a decreased trust between employees and their direct managers and employees and their organization as a whole. If I don't have a sense that you're caring about me and that you're worried about me through this transition, then I'm going to have an overall loss of trust, and that's going to affect things downstream. And as Leah mentioned, we should start thinking about change ahead of the change. How do we prepare our workforce, building a capacity and a capability for change ahead of the actual change itself? And sometimes that's hard to do, but we do need to start thinking about it and preparing our workforce, and creating that sense of trust between employees and managers is a great place to start.
Yeah, what you're mentioning, both of you specifically, Leah, when you had mentioned working on this during steady times, reminds me of the book I read, I don't know, 25, 30 years ago by Harvey Mackay called Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty, about building those relationships when you don't need it, when there's not an agenda. I'd love your take a little bit more, Lee, on what Dr. Sheryl said.
Absolutely. And it's an and also proposition. It is certainly work to maintain, strengthen that sense of well-being during times of steady state, and also acknowledge that your well-being is a little bit more at risk potentially during times of change and transformation, that it can be harder to conjure up that sense of resilience when transformation and change happens. So it is an and also proposition. Take care of well-being during that time of steadiness, and also recognize that more is likely needed during times of change and uncertainty. And the challenge is that when organizations neglect to support that resilience in their teams, they're less likely to recover from those challenges of transformation. It takes them longer to bounce back. And as a result, organizations are then less likely to experience the benefits of the transformation that you're striving for. So resilience is particularly necessary during times of changing course or transformation. And when we are resilient, the disruption that comes with the change or the transformation, it doesn't bring us down. We can cope, even, dare I say, be optimistic about the change. But when we are in a weakened physical or emotional state, right, when our well-being is suffering, it is harder to find that resilience. And that's why I say it's an and also proposition. Maintain, build, strengthen, be healthy during times that are a steady state. And also recognize that it may be a little bit harder to maintain that sense of health and wellness when you are transforming or changing. And that is at a time when you need to be even more resilient than you might otherwise expect to be.
Yeah. And I would say this as from observation over the years of knowing you, Leah, you're really good at bringing practical strategies and approaches to things in, like I said, many of your amazing articles and research papers I've read You both are. But specifically, are there any approaches, Leah, that organizations or individuals can take to promote some of this much sought after mental and physical well being during periods of change?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think a lot of folks will listen to hopefully this podcast and others and agree with a lot of the premise of what I might share or Cheryl might share. But then I always feel as though there's a point where folks are like, okay, you had me. I hear you. I understand what you're saying, well being and resilience. But what do I do? What does that look like?
Right. Give us something to climb the mountain here. Help us flex our muscles.
There you go. Whatever metaphor works for you, right? Yeah, I do like to make it as specific and tangible. And the former marketer in me always likes some way of making it, I don't know, sticky or memorable. And so I think about when you say, well, how can you do this? What are some of the ways that you can do it? I think about what I call the 4 C's. And those stand for care, as in self care, communication, connection, and coping skills. And there's a fifth, but we won't worry about that.
What? Are we going to save that for the long form content?
That's a secret. That'll come in a couple minutes.
I like that. The 4 C's. This is good. I like it.
You'll remember it now, right? So, what do I mean by that? I'll go through them quickly. So, care, self care, putting boundaries in place. That might mean switching off work related concerns and even contact during non work hours. It might mean during periods of particular uncertainty and fatigue, mental fatigue. It might mean accessing things like EAP or mental health hotlines or even on site counselors. So, the first C is about care. The second C is about connection. So having a network of support, colleagues, your leader, again, EAP resources. The third C is communication, making sure those lines of communication are open with your colleagues and your leader. And that includes creating an environment of psychological safety so you can communicate without fear of judgment, retaliation, share your concerns or maybe even your excitement about the change. So, care, connection, communication, and last but not least, I'll say coping, and a real emphasis here on coping skills that feel appropriate for you. So, for some people, mindfulness and meditation is going to sound like a great way of coping. For others, that will drive them bananas and they can't be mindful or meditate. And that's okay, right? So maybe their coping skills are some other kind of movement or self expression. It doesn't really matter what the coping skill is, just that you find something. So, care, connection, communication, and coping, if it helps for listeners to remember, for me are really specific ways that folks can start to cultivate some strong behaviors.
Dr. Sheryl, I'm sure you're dying to chime in on this.
Yeah, so a lot of these things that we're talking about here are related to the employees and helping support them through these times of change. And we also want to remember that leaders are employees as well. And sometimes we overlook the need that they have to be fully prepared and to feel confident through these change supporting their teams. And so, as we're planning for the change, we need to make sure that our leads, our champions, the folks that are really driving this change feel empowered to be able to support their teams. Do they have all the information they need? Do they have their own questions answered? Do we have transparent communication, even with the leadership teams and the top levels, to make sure that they understand what the change is all about and how to reinforce that with their teams? So, defining those elements early and giving them the tools they need will go a long way to helping support teams on all the various levels of the organization.
Yeah. And I'm going to stick with you here, Dr. Sheryl, because I know that culture is something that a lot of people say, culture eats strategy for lunch or things like that. I'd love your take on what role organizational culture plays in fostering resilience and well-being.
Yeah, so many of you may have been listening to all of these incredible things that Leah was talking about and saying, wow, you have to be a special organization to really talk about self-care and coping mechanisms and creating space for that as an organization. And culture does play a really big role in an organization's ability to adapt in this way. It sets the tone. And when resilience and well being are embedded in the values, the processes, and the leadership behaviors, it signals permission for people to prioritize their mental and physical health. we have to see that the organization cares about it, that we're making space, that our leaders are doing these things as well. If someone is working at midnight but telling you, you don't need to respond to my messages at midnight, I'm like, well, clearly, if I want to advance in this organization, I need to be sending emails at midnight. So, are we creating the culture that's going to reinforce self care and taking care of well being and open and transparent communication from the top? So it really is important. Culture helps sustain resilience through the current and future transformation cycles, but also outside of any significant transformation.
That's fantastic insight on that there. And, Leah, when we're thinking about influence, it does start not only with culture, but leadership. So,
Yeah.
curious from your perspective here, I mean, how does leadership influence resilience and well-being?
Yeah, and for sure, I absolutely agree with what Sheryl is saying about leaders needing to role model the good behavior. What I also believe, and this is where my fifth secret C comes in, and that is that it is something that needs to be really uniquely cultivated or customized, is probably the better C way of saying it, to each individual. So what well-being looks like is customized or specific to each individual. A little bit back to what I was saying before, because not everybody's definition of connection is the same, right? Some individuals may want regular contact to help them through the transformation or the change. In order to be resilient, they need that regular connection. For others, maybe they do a better job of processing things quietly and independently. So extreme connection isn't something that they need. Like I said, coping mechanisms. You can offer meditation, but if that's not someone's cup of tea, then that's not a sort of customized approach to resilience and well-being for that individual. So the role of the leader is not to customize a resilience and well-being plan for each individual, but to understand and recognize that it looks different for each person, and to appreciate and understand that how I cope, how I communicate, how I connect is maybe a little bit different from the way Sheryl does or you do. And so what's the role of the leader? The role of the leader is to engage with that individual, understand their values, their style, what's important to them, and support different ways of well-being and resilience, but not force a one-size-fits-all for the individuals on your team. So all those components are important: the care, the coping, the communication, the connection, but what they look like is different for each person, and leaders need to acknowledge and understand that.
And if I could jump in right here too, I mentioned at the beginning about the role of trust between manager and employee, and you cannot do what Leah was just talking about without that level of trust. And you've got to start building that early, but it can really be developed during times of change. Are you allowing your teams to be vulnerable? Are you being vulnerable and open with them, demonstrating and being an example of that behavior, so that they know they can trust you with how I need to cope and what that looks like for me, and then creating space, whatever that looks like, but allowing for these options? That's going to go a long way to building that relationship, which is really a linchpin for keeping engagement together and getting through these difficult times.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And you're right, Sheryl. Without that trust, the kinds of conversations and exchange that I'm advocating for is going to be really difficult. And so I would underline, bold, put an asterisk next to that word trust and psychological safety, because you're right. Without that, understanding and engaging with your people in this way to understand what they need is going to be particularly challenging. So super important.
Okay, I'm really excited about this. I think our listeners would appreciate some very, very practical strategies. So I'm going to start with you, Leah. What are some concrete practices companies can implement to support resilience and well-being during change, of course?
Yeah, but again, steady state, so that when you experience the change, you are ready to be resilient. So that, and also proposition, offer it during a steady state, and also it will be especially important during moments of uncertainty. And some of those things include training on resilience skills and stress management, not to try and conjure those up in that that moment of uncertainty, but to gain those skills of resilience and stress management during a steady state so you can call upon them when you need them during times of change. I would say flexible work arrangements when possible to give people the space to maybe ramp up what they need to do when things are intense, but also find that balance in their home life or whatever that looks like for them when they need it. So flexible work arrangements. I'm a big advocate of normalizing conversations around mental health. Not saying that leaders need to be, nor should they be, mental health professionals. It should be, though, very okay to talk about when we're stressed, when we're anxious, when we're feeling a certain way that we can't quite name, but we know that there's something going on with us. That is a really powerful way of helping people not only maintain their well-being, but when the need for resilience and bouncing back from change spikes, we already have the language and the trust, as Sheryl pointed out, to normalize those conversations. It doesn't have to just be the leader. I think establishing peer support groups is a great way to give folks access to connection through other individuals in the organization. And then one that often gets lost, I think, in the shuffle is the importance of reinforcing purpose and alignment during change. And what does that mean? That sounds like a mouthful. Basically, what this means is when employees understand how they connect to something bigger, they are much less likely to experience burnout. So when things are intense, right? Intense times of change or transformation, and folks are just grinding, and they really don't get how what they're doing is a part of something bigger, again, they're more likely to burn out. So what leaders can do is to make sure they're reinforcing that purpose, that connection, how the individual fits into the larger change. And doing so is a really great way of supporting both ongoing well-being and resilience. But I'm sure Dr. Sheryl has some things that she'd like to add as well. Now I'm calling you that, Sheryl.
Yeah, so I love that last element about really taking a look. I mean, I loved all of it, but the last element about aligning with a bigger purpose and those values is just so critical and something that you do in the change planning phase. So we're aligning what's in it for me as an employee. How does this connect to our organizational strategy and our business and where we're going? I need that higher vision to be able to see what this means for me and how I fit into this future, where you're going as an organization. I would also say as we're designing our plan and looking at what this means for implementation and moving forward, we need to not forget about conducting a well-being impact assessment. How is this going to impact employee well-being? What does this look like? That's something that we often don't talk about. I wouldn't call it taboo, but it's not necessarily something that is broadly spoken, especially with various cultures across organizations. But that's something that we can break down and say, what is the impact to the individual? We often do stakeholder analysis, and we can start to get at that, but to really look at well-being and what it's going to take for them to be able to move forward. A big part of our change planning process is a change readiness. How much change is going on in the organization right now? Is this going to be really impacting their change fatigue and they're just one change after another? Or is nothing else really going on? And this is the first change that we've seen in a while. Those things matter and they impact how people are going to respond. Really being mindful of workloads and mental impact that this change is going to have. Overall, I want to remind our listeners that organizations don't change, people do. These are individuals that have to have the mental shift. They're the ones that are going to have to do something differently. While transformation may happen at that organizational level, it must also happen at the individual level. We have to prepare them appropriately and walk them through this process, not just expecting everyone to jump on board and be okay with it. They will have an impact, and we just need to measure what that's going to look like.
That's a nice transition to my next question here. And that really is looking at the next 3 to 5 years. I'd love both of your respective perspectives on this, on how do you see the relationship between resilience, well-being, and transformation evolving over that period of time? Sheryl, what do you think? So let's have you go first.
We've got to consider the human side of change. It's almost like we're having an awakening where we're recognizing that we're all people and change is hard and life is hard and we're very individual. I tell my clients and folks that I work with is that while everybody is going through a change, employees need their managers to know that it's hard on them. Yes, everyone is challenged, but I need you to know that I'm having a hard time. I'm having to do something differently. I'm scared. I'm concerned about what this looks like for me. And if we just look at the broad level and say, yeah, everybody's got to do something differently, I know you're not seeing me. And we're starting to recognize that that's an important part of relationship building and organizations. We have to see the individual. And there's this big AI trend. Everyone's kind of moving in that direction. And we're starting to see that, hey, it's not just AI, it's human plus AI. We've got to consider that human side of it and the interaction between the two. We've got to remember that individual side and that organizations with this strong resilience and well-being cultures will gain that competitive advantage over the long term.
I love that you're tying it back to bottom line, right? You'll survive and thrive better. Yeah, Leah?
Yeah, there's not much I can add to what Sheryl said. Just that, again, I do think every organization is transforming. It is almost impossible to find an organization that is not using, in fact, that exact terminology. If I had a dime for every organization who said, we're transforming, I would be just sort of sitting here on piles of money, right? But I think that's because it's not a choice, it's a necessity. And I think that more so than any other factor, that transformation is being prompted by technology, but it's going to be enabled by human beings. So prompted by technology, but enabled by human beings. That's what I think it is. I think the next 3 to 5 years is going to be continued transformation. I think technology is a big part of it. And we have to keep in mind the well-being and the resilience of the human beings that are really going to make that transformation a reality.
I think that's fantastic insight from both of you. Now, as we're closing, I would like one key takeaway that each of you would want listeners to remember. If there was one thing about today's conversation, what would it be? Dr. Sheryl, you go first.
Yeah, just ultimately, you can't have resilient organizations without resilient people. And resilience is built, not born. You've got to make intentional efforts to foster well-being and adaptability, and it must be woven into every stage of transformation to be successful.
Fantastic parting shot there. How about you, Leah?
I would say even pre-transformation. So my sort of parting takeaway, health and well-being are important in a steady state. On a day-to-day basis, it's important to work on or maintain both. So cultivate it during a steady state so you can lean on it or call on it during times of transformative change.
Fantastic. I've taken away so much from this conversation. Dare I say, I am uplifted. My well-being, I feel significantly better. Number one, knowing that there are professionals like you both within the GP practice that are helping organizations really tune into the importance and the power of this, but also just for sharing some really great insight with our listeners, and with Dr. Sheryl doing it under the weather too. Very, very impressive. So thank you very much to the both of you for sharing so generously of your insight. We certainly appreciate you.
The Performance Matters podcast is brought to you by GP Strategies. Together, we can create a world where business excellence makes possibilities achievable. You can subscribe to the show anywhere you get podcasts or listen on our website at gpstrategies.com.